Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest iteration of the web series The Nature of Predators Book 2. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 52. Memory Transcript Subject Tassie Bison Alien Liaison. Date Standardized Human Time September 26, 2160. Camera drone surveyed the system, admiring the devastation wrought across swaths of space. The FTL disruptors might have bought us precious months to prepare for a defense, but eventually the enemy broke through, snuffing out enough FTL disruptors to make incremental progress, and slogging their way into the planetary sector. The fossil homeworld, as projected on our prior intelligence briefings, had been the first to meet our unknown nemesis. The United Nations had locked the region by Tusk's Kessler cage down, standing against the would-be murderers with thousands of drones. The humans were crafty devils and had laid down a multitude of traps to fend off the automatons, but machines saw through such schemes better than crude vessels. I hadn't known what to think when the two sides traded blows. Sure enough, Kaisel had brought his forces gunning to the fray, finding a microscopic backdoor left for Sapien Coalition allies. The Terrans had balked when the Arxol forces warped into Tusk's vicinity, with two ceremonial ships at the front displaying the banner of the collective. The icon, being of an Arxol skull with a sword through its nearest eye socket, wasn't reassuring anyone that the cannibals had changed that much. I suppose a kinder interpretation would be that it was symbolic of the rebellion, slaying Betterment officials, and that, at least, it wasn't showing dead prey animals. It certainly didn't play well to the SC audience, who had been in uproar at their arrival. And none of it was enough to stop bombs from peppering down on the fossil. Granted, humanity took measures to evacuate a number of civilians to a different location, where they're also imprisoned, but somewhere the enemy wouldn't know to track them down. What if that makes the United Nations a target next? As you all know, the Sapien Coalition needs to hold a full review of what happened at Tusk's. Vendel Governor Leysa had taken command of the meeting. While the Vendel Republic were humanity's closest allies, they had no love lost for the fossil or the Arxol. That made them less of a public enemy, even if they were mere vessels to facilitate the UN's message. It wasn't a surprise that the Arxol breached quarantine, might I remind you, nor is that the first time the Greys rode into a fight on humanity or Prey World's behalf. We needed their aid once to fight the Kolshians, and after how our forces fared alone, I'm not sure that we can afford to refuse their help. Mazik President Quapper seemed incensed by the Vendel suggestion. That's rich of you, coming from Tarver's political party. We have respect for humans, don't get me wrong. But you welcome them bulldozing your own ways. Skelga doesn't push back against any of their political plays. You eat every word and thought straight from their hands. There's a difference between being their ally and being their vassal. You're out of line, insulting us and the United Nations. How dare you make insinuations about the special bond that our neighbor worlds share? We strongly disagree with how you've turned a blind eye to the Arxol. You think that we don't remember how Tarver piped up in favor of that Isv character at our founding summit, that you changed the story right now, from how the Greys only fought on our side for a small portion of the Battle of Alpha. This is all some ploy to get the collective into the Sapien Coalition. And the Mazik Presidium will not work alongside monsters. You're not getting out of this, Kuiper. What did you mean about us being the United Nations vassals? You know, Lysa. Skelga has the highest human population of any Sapien Coalition world. You're the only alien power that was given their own secluded spot on Earth. Really, this is about a tiny gifted research island, which the United Nations gave us as a thank you for literally saving their species, for protecting them and giving them a chance when no others would. That little island is just one of many reasons that you and the humans are much too intertwined to permit an independent decision. You are not going to allow a voting bloc of nearly 100 million Terrans to go to waste. Lysa pinned her ears back, a scowl creasing her face. How dare you? You helped humanity build the station. Their largest colony, and now you're acting like cohabitation outside Earth is a bad thing. I thought in the Sapien Coalition we agreed that humans are people like any other aliens. We do. That's why they should have one vote, like every other species, not two. They aren't our predator master. We don't have to sit by and watch the Oxor disregard the authority of this institution. That to us isn't something I will forget. That's enough, Onzo barked, storming up to the stage. You want someone that will challenge humanity? The technocracy is happy to take a critical approach to their present suggestions and does not believe that they're above any of us. We have the military might to do better at the next contest, the one that actually matters, Nishtal. The Crocodile ambassador rose from her station, an irritated glint in her eyes. Our home is on the line, and you're bickering about islands and fecking Libby Station. I say let the yodel speak. The Vendel governor eyed the red-furred marsupial as he sauntered onto the stage. Onzo was wearing human-styled sunglasses on his forehead, like he never intended for them to cover his eyes. The two representatives studied each other, a staring contest that appeared to have some bubbling hostility. I wasn't sure what the technocracy was playing at. They might have a shot to move the needle on the Oxor. Their goal was simply to open the doors for trade purposes. Perhaps this is also a power grab, snatching a leadership role away from the Terrans. The Yodel had a formidable military to back any of their claims, and I still remember how Dustin suggested they had intelligence on SC members, rivaling Jones's maneuvers. Onzo got the Bisons working for the Yodel, and a lot like Jones, come to think of it. Both sides threatening us with revoking our SC membership. Of the two, I suspect the Yodel would be more likely to follow through on threats to bar us from the SC. For her sake, I don't want to be beholden to anyone in that way. We need the Carnivore Alliance, whether I like it or not. The floor is yours, Lysa hissed at last, stepping away from the microphone. Onzo offered a sly ear flick and strolled up to survey the crowd. The Vendel think that we need the Oxor to win this war. If you want to have an educated discussion on that, we need a strategic review of exactly how it all played out, our failings, their capabilities. We must survey all of our options. Why don't we save these discussions for after we review what happened at Tusk? Very well. I'm listening, Piper sighed. As an engineer, we learned to look for structural weaknesses. Liquid armor, for instance, is single-use and unable to withstand applied amounts of direct, penetrative damage. Bullets can be deflected by the simple metal, causing a ship's exterior. But we wanted their hull integrity obliterated. And that's how the human Yodel R&D teams came up with the idea of space harpoons. Let's start from the top. Zork and Naltor looked quite eager to take notes on SC weaponry, especially with the Civkits and the Bisons now working together on Avrana to engineer newfangled fleet. Ambassador Loxel had talked about raising an army to retake Tensis himself, if need be, with Bisons desperate for potent allies and the SC needing as many ships as possible. We'd managed to worm our way into the action. I still wondered what the Grand Herd would think, had they been informed of our theory of that the original Civkits might be behind all of this. They were quite serious about reclaiming their homeworld, which meant they might find out the hard way. The other Bisons didn't seem worried about that, rather focusing on pitching the technocracy on joint intelligence. I wasn't particularly eager to listen to the specifics of the battle plans and techno-babble, so I found myself dwelling on what I'd learned about the Yodel, a Rinsian engineer. We dug into Onzo and found out that his best friend, to this day, is a human, one that he met through the Yodel-Terran exchange program. He had once reflected quite fondly on Earth's foreign policy and way of life, one of many marsupials that used to be happy to partner with them. His species was exuberant that someone finally treated them as equals, yet now the UN and the technocracy are tugging the SC in two polar opposite directions. I could still hear the Yodel's reply when I asked him what changed from back when he believed humanity had the optimal path forward for the galaxy, one that offered a vast improvement from the methods of the Federation. They lost their way. They stopped being better, Onzo had answered. They placed no boundaries on the reach of their progress, and they repeat mistakes of the past. They see this golden era of peace as their crowning accomplishment, and won't make any waves for fear of undoing it. Now they're dragging other parties into the stagnant retention pond, pretending that they don't smell shit. The Yodel wanted the Sapien Coalition fully cleansed of the Federation's residue, whereas humanity was terrified of losing their friends. I disagreed that the Terrans had stopped being better than their old regime by virtue of how completely fucking maniacal the Kolshian fossil conspiracy was, but I saw why both sides were jockeying for more power. I hated being used to and caught in the middle. However, there was too much politicking and scheming involved to fit my fantasy of friendship with aliens. Maybe they were still part of the United Nations that wanted to make waves if they'd pushed a little to bring the Bisons into the Sapien Coalition. Of course, humanity couldn't abide their allies not fully accepting predators. There was a sticking point for them. Some estimate numbers in their offensive had always been 150,000 strong. We knew from the engagement at Tinzas that they have a better turning radius than our standard ship models, so we predicted that a smaller, faster-moving defensive fleet would be ideal, Anzo was saying in the present time, tapping a simulated visual of the outer edges of Tulsk's systems. At the time of the enemy's initial entry, they might spit asteroids at us, but we had a different idea. Using projected arrival times, we set cannons by Tulsk's suns, days of travels away, to fire tungsten rods across their paths. They deployed solar sails behind them to accelerate efficiently, and without leaving any propulsional signatures for advance warning. Also, as a bonus, they're not a large rock that can be seen miles away. There's your space harpoons. Recreations of enemy drones showed blisteringly fast rods impaling them by probability. Their algorithms reacted much like they had with the Niner drones, by sweeping dust guns in front of them to torch any invisible, devastating projectiles. Many G-weapons followed up with a few volleys to ensure that any incoming tungsten munitions were destroyed. The Sapien Coalition had known the enemy would have these countermeasures after they were deployed at Tinzesper's battle, but the constant rod barrage kept at least one of their weapons distracted. Even if they still cleared the outer, icy bands of space, depleting their available energy, and microscopic particles gave us a small advantage to build upon. Then again, the casualty count seemed an insignificant portion of their total offensive. Perhaps a few hundred ships hindered by this attempt. At least we had known the enemy drone's exact position, and there was no element of surprise. The Yodel technocracy and United Nations defense line held about 60,000 ships and waited to contest the hostiles in Tulsk's backyard. After how our allies had fared at the numerical disadvantage in the first conflict, their preparations needed to at least whittle down our foes' count to be on an even footing. The rest of the SC, 80 other members, had only coughed up a few thousand ships combined to keep up the appearance of following the joint military defensive pact. The vast majority of their aid had gone to Nishtal. It was the Terrans' turn to cook up a trap, with the Yodel having played their migration tokens. Therefore, the cloaked stations, painted in super black coloration to align with the void, decided to strike. There were no cameras on the stations to avoid standing out from the near-invisible object and revealing it. However, we had the humans' data of the engagement. That was enough for Anzo to recreate their powerful strike. While Earth might have been content to lie dormant, they were still artists of warfare, deviously created in the field. While the enemy knew that invisible projectiles were coming from the sun, a nanodrone swarm zipping out from another angle would present a dual problem. The cloaked infrastructure waited until enemies were on their doorstep to strike. Only as UN nanodrones zipped away did they reveal their true plan. The hidden outpost detonated a massive antimatter bomb lodged inside of it. Shrapnel was hurled in every direction, a massive explosion consuming hundreds of enemies in its radius. I shuddered to imagine that such bombs had struck cities on Earth, and planets that the Arxor had raided. The raw power of the weaponry, tearing apart anything in its wake, a forceful thunderclap unleashed upon the hostiles, was something that terrified Bisims. If one of those reached our planet again, there would be nothing that we could do. Just as the Tessia had watched their settlements crumble long ago. At Tulsk, not even our mysterious foes had an answer to the humans' gigantic explosions, and that meant we'd scored a serious blow against these invaders at last. The hostile drones compensated quickly, firing out probing missiles for any additional stations that would wreak havoc, and finding the other one. The drone algorithms were well programmed, so it is likely that, if they can locate a countermeasure, we can only use the tactic once against them before they adjust, Hanzo narrated. We don't know if the 3 prongs of their attack are coordinating, but our intelligence suggests that the answer is no. We can't pick up any communication signals. That also means that we cannot relay a message to whoever is behind this back at Tenzas and implore them to call this off, though I doubt there would be an option either way. The Gojid Prime Minister snorted. It's time to stop trying to talk. They have no intention of picking up the phone. It's never time to stop trying to talk, and I'd much rather resolve this dispute diplomatically than through armed conflict. Secretary General Erin Keinfer spoke up, from where she was conferring with Governor Leysa. Dustin mentioned that having the Vendel in our corner would be an ace in the hole, with their influence on the UN. Naltor had yet to concoct a plan to bring that about. Whoever these aggressors are, they must believe that we're the Federation, given their targets. They might hold a grudge for the atrocities committed against Tenzas. They're lashing out, the same as when the Jurtian demanded the Shadow Cast's deaths, something many of you were very understanding of. Humanity keeps saving every species that's hurt us. You're doing it again. Maybe we should just let them have Tusk, the Harkon ambassador piped up. Why would you lose so many ships for them? We saved species that hurt us, if you might recall. I believe the Harkon were among them, along with several others in this room. There's power in mercy. Nobody else has to die, and that is humanity's belief. The Thafki ambassador's whiskers twitched angrily. When your species is a delicacy, Madam Secretary General, perhaps you'll begin to come around to the idea that some monsters have done enough that they, in fact, have to die. The same thing was said about humanity. Zerudian Ambassador Charlson, who had been friendly in our brief interactions, cast a stern glance at the crowd. His people had already welcomed by some doctors to train at the Galactic Institute of Medicine and offered their pre-first contact research on our worst diseases. They were one of the most eager species to accept us. Saving lives is much more fulfilling than condemning entire species to death. We, for one, are proud to stand behind the United Nations' staunch anti-genocide policy and unwavering application of our sapient rights articles. The humans had never did what the Orcs did to us. And the United Nations, again, shouldn't have a blanket veto power. The general sentiment in this organization is not in favor of their inflexible enforcement of interstellar law, Kuiper added. Hanzo slammed a paw against the podium. This review of the Battle of Tusk was supposed to be strategic. This is not a game, representatives. Forget what you think of any of this, because it's beside the point. Where would you rather be trying to stop this assault? By the fossil homeworld, or by your own? The silence that greeted the Yotel's question was all of the answer that he needed, and his facial features relaxed. I didn't imagine there was a delegation in this chamber that wanted competent enemies en route to their planets. Then you should have helped. Shall we continue? Hanzo asked. With the testy assemblage back in line, the Sapient Coalition returned to our review of the massive contest. So far, we had only managed to tackle the initial traps. I hoped that we'd have less internal strife as we reviewed the main clash by the fossil homeworld, with the Oxel, the release of the bombs, and the implications for the other 2 contests that entailed. End of chapter. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.